I love this quote from your article, and I'm going to read it for our viewers. Quote, Xi Jinping firmly believes that if he can control the historical narrative, he can control the future. Under the influence of Marxism, history is defined backwards by the CCP. End quote. Kevin, we see a lot of that happening in Australia, both in the political landscape and academia, where Australia's history is being rewritten in real time. Should Australians be worried about their history being changed? And by that I mean, are academics in Australia changing colonial history with the intent of changing our political future?
Indeed, this is part of the whole Marxist influence on history as well as a number of other disciplines. It's quite clear under the Marxist narrative that the past is redefined to suit the future, and that influence is not just in countries like China. There is an influence in academia, in the scholarly community in Australia, as Marxism has its influence, and we need to resist this because it's totally wrong. It distorts history, and it's there for a political purpose rather than for the purpose of actually describing and trying to observe what that history of the past was. It does us no good by trying to reinvent history in this way. In fact, it leads us quite astray.
Look, I did have to have a bit of a chuckle at your article, as horrifying as it is, don't get me wrong. After all, China is going to all this effort and trouble and commissioning journalists, to erase the towering figures of Western civilization, when these self-hating academics are doing that already right here in the West. Our lecturers are the ones tearing down statues of their university namesakes. We've got kids who are blockading themselves from their own history. I mean, half the kids probably don't even know who Aristotle is these days, and if they do know, they probably think he's a white supremacist. Why is China bothering when the West is doing such a good job on its own?
Well, I think this is the nature of the Chinese regime. The nature of the totalitarian regime is that the political narrative has to be controlled, that everything is political, but this influence is now having its impact in terms of countries like Australia and indeed in the West. In the academy, there are many more who follow advertently or inadvertently the Marxist narrative, and we see that influence here in Australia, unfortunately, and that's why we need to expose it and call it into question when we come across ridiculous articles like this.
It's kind of like when the Russians were being made fun of because they were going to all this trouble to spy on the US, and all they really need to do is log on to TikTok and pretty much everything you want is right there anyway. But let's flip this narrative around.